32.
Camera's rolling.
Okay, Orson Swindle, B-roll, take one.
And Bill, you're monitoring sound.
I am not. Why don't you give me your earpiece?
Okay, that way, because I don't know how long those batteries last, just in case they would go out. I'm gonna step over here, Orson, where we can talk.
Give me a moment. I'm
Okay.
gonna jiggle my camera.
Just curious, how long does your battery last? Are they, we have one of these Ring doorbells which is not connected. You saw I'm hot wiring it now with it. I had a battery in it, and in cold weather, that battery dies in about 2 days.
The cold weather, the batteries don't like.
They're terrible.
I think lithium does better.
This is a lithium
It is.
battery, but it was not, about a week, about the longest I ever had it
Yeah.
run.
Actually, maybe lithium does not do well in cold. Maybe go back to
The old-fashioned kind.
alkaline. Yeah, see what that does in cold. Okay. First of all, it's such a delight. I'm just so enjoying meeting and getting to know you. I mean, as I've told you, when your name comes up, people really, oh, Orson, you're gonna like it. Orson's a good guy, which is great.
You obviously didn't talk to the ones I made mad. Well, that's very nice of them to say, and very nice of you, and we're glad to have you in our home. So it's fun taking the pictures with the geese today and watching their reaction to your drone.
Eye line good for you, Bill, in terms of where I'm sitting?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. I'm not too high. Okay.
You are a little high.
Yeah, let me
Can
get
you
us.
grab a dining room chair?
Dining
I think
chairs
that'll put
and-
you a little lower.
There's a straight chair if you need it in the den there. It's
Actually might work. Do we need the ottoman in front of
I
it?
don't see it.
Okay. Do you mind if I bring that
No.
over? Because that's actually lower here. And I think that'll work. And how's that for an eye line,
Much
Bill?
better.
Okay.
So you spend all your time looking at him.
okay.
Cameras don't exist and I don't exist.
So, the first thing I wanted to talk about, which you expressed so beautifully, is about the comradeship, the bond that all of you formed together, the friendships you made, and this is a vulnerable time of life because some of those friends are passing on, and in a way, there's an extension of the battle behind bars that was begun that many years ago. Now you have to let go of these guys, but you do so. You have such respect for each other. You've seen each other through the hardest of times, and the principles of honor and courage and faith and patriotism still stand. So can you speak to me about the personal side of the community of POWs?
Well, I think among those attributes that you described, Patrick, the one thing, one of the things that I think stands out about these relationships, and we saw it in prison, and that's these close bonds are probably most often, if not always, built on a real sense of honesty between one another. I think I mentioned to you that people tend to be amazed, I think, to some extent, that we seem so normal. I would beg to differ because I've been with them. We're normal. But how are you that way? And I think you mentioned some statistics, and maybe we'll discuss that about post-traumatic stress syndrome. That why are we the way we are as compared to our contemporaries, comparatively? And I think it's because we had over how many years? 6, 5, 7, 9. We had all this time when we had the opportunity to talk. We always told each other our story. And I don't know whether it was just circumstances, but I don't know of anybody that lied. And we have people who maybe don't like us. So how do you know that happened? Because he told me so. And he went through the grinder just like I did, and we have this trust in one another. That honesty is a big thing. But the personal relationships have, for the most part, been derived after really harsh things happen. It was not uncommon for me to go through a bad session of brutality, and then they dumped me in a cell with somebody else And when I say cell in this interview, I want you to understand it's not a jail cell like we're familiar with in the cowboy movies. It's solid concrete block walls and no windows. If there was a window, it was boarded up. But it was very common for us to go through bad times and wind up being thrown in a cell with somebody you don't even know. And I think that was often their effort to intimidate the other guy. You know, after you tell him what happened to you, it scared the living daylights out of him. But we went through bad times together, and the times got better as much time passed by. But in those early years, the brutality was eye-watering, to say the least. And it was not uncommon. I've heard it said by many a person, and I know I experienced it. There was a point in time where I just said, good Lord, please take my life. I can't do this anymore. And I've heard it said by more than one that the Vietnamese would tell the prisoner that we're not going to kill you. That's too good for you. You're going to suffer. So it's that crucible, if you will, Marine Corps term, we like to say our recruits go through the crucible. And it was educational, to say the least, but from it came these incredible bonds. And as you said, I'm 82 now, and I was one of the young guys. Most of the people that I knew as prisoners of war, I shouldn't say most, but it's getting close to most, have passed away. This very day, right at this very time, they're having a memorial service and burial at Barrancas National Cemetery in Pensacola, Florida, from one of my dearest friends. And it just goes on, and we all experienced it. All of our friends, many of our friends are passing away, and we reflect on not the hard times. I would certainly make that correction if I gave that impression. When we're together at reunions, we only talk about funny things. We just have a great time laughing and drinking and making fun of each other. But we went through the bad times, and we do remember those bad times, and that makes for strong, strong friendships.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to sip at this warm tea so that I don't cough
Okay.
as we speak, because I've got this chest thing going on.
I just noticed we had the door open, and there's a humongous fly.
Oh,
here.
yeah.
It'll probably land right on my nose here at some point. There he is.
Yeah.
He'll probably make it over here to the screen and wish he was on the outside. It's unusual. We don't have, in South Georgia, we got flies. We got every insect known to man. Out here, very few insects.
Isn't that great?
Oh, it's wonderful. No,
People come from the East Coast to visit us in New Mexico, and we go, well, let's set out and have dinner outside. Well, how can you go outside? Well, there's no mosquitoes here.
yeah, no mosquitoes. How nice that is.
Yeah. So let's follow up on this notion that, and it just struck me for the first time. You were able to do incredible things with each other because you had so much time. Whether it was going through your memories or learning languages or memorizing names, you had all of this time. And you said something that's so powerful, that we told each other our stories. Mm-hmm. And what strikes me is in present day society, we see so many things that we consider aberrant. Columbine, not far from here, the shooting at Columbine High School. But if you step back from it in its most negative way, that young man who opened fire on those students was trying to tell his story. He was trying to be known, but you found in the worst of circumstances how telling of one's story can heal. And there's so much that the present day military needs to understand, how to help young men and women returning from the field of conflict, how to share their stories. But one of the things that strikes me is that you've just introduced is that you had the ingredient of time as well.
Not without difficulties, I might add.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of that getting to know one another was done by tapping through walls and covertly communicating. I lived first 6 months by myself, then I was put in with 3 guys, and then the 4 of us were taken out and tortured, and then we were split up. I was back by myself again. And then we go in and out of this solitary confinement. It wasn't solitary confinement because that connotes no communication, and that was not the case at all. The minute they shut the door, we were on the wall tapping, trying to establish communications, and we had many ways to do that. But later on, as the torturing, mostly after Ho Chi Minh died, that was a good day. And the torturing, they backed off of it. And had very little brutality from that point on. Certainly no brutality that I can recall, and I may be wrong on this, but I don't know of any brutality like the guys, the first 130 or 40 guys underwent when they were there fighting the battle as it started for the POWs. But later on, we were able to be in little larger groups, in some cases where they moved us in after the Sante raid. In November of 1970, we moved back into Hanoi Hilton, as people would know, and we were placed there were anywhere from 40 to 50 in a cell. It was a big room. I think the first time we got into this situation, we were meeting people we've been tapping through balls to for years. And when you first met him, you said, well, you can't be that guy. You don't look anything like him. Of course, we'd never seen each other, but you build these mental images. But we were so crowded and so happy to be crowded because so many of us had spent so much time in a solitary type environment, or solo as we like to say. And we measured how much floor space we had to sleep. And I think we all had about 18 inches, which is, I think my shoulder's a little wider than 18 inches. But it was absolutely a delight. We were there, could talk, look at people, and take a measure of them as you're meeting them. And you know, in that raw environment, truth is absolutely the best elixir there is. And we shared those stories, and you know, and we all went through very similar things. I've done a lot of public speaking, and I've heard many of us give presentations, and without coordinating, we all say essentially we cover it the same way. Different personalities have different ways of delivering something, but the story is always the same. And had we not been able to have that time together, it might have been a different story. But I think the ability to share stories, to share heartbreak, to share sadness, to share funny things, and we had lots of funny things happen, or we created funny things, is all a part of what makes us who we are today. I think I've heard many sources, but I know this to be true. We're all, almost without exception, extremely positive. We don't dwell on the negative, and we had enough of that, and we had no control over it. We have control now. We're not going to dwell on the negative. And that's not to say there aren't negative things, but just the sour attitude, the bitterness. And then I don't sense any bitterness from anybody. There may be a few, but I don't know. If there are, I wouldn't have anything to do with them, because don't bring that to me. I don't want that. I'm free of that now, and everything is as positive as I can make it, and with the help of family and friends, I've been very fortunate in that regard.
Because this is such a powerful theme, if I were to put you in a room right now full of young Marines or mixed services, all suffering from one form or another of PTSD, how, from your experience and what you and your fellow former POWs went through, how would you speak to them? What could you offer them that might help them sort through?
It's tough to imagine. I have a friend who's a POW. He was a captain. He's an acquaintance. He's not really a friend, but I see him once or twice a year up in Massachusetts area, and he suffers. He was captain the last year of the war. A special forces guy, overrun by way too many people, and he really suffers. And one of my friends, this guy was not a Marine, but one of his closest friends is one of my closest friends that I met since I came home. And my closest friend has his own form of PTSD. He was involved in fighting up on the DMZ. I mean, he was wounded himself. But the thing that gets him through to this other gentleman is an extraordinary degree of kindness and concern and willingness to listen. For God's sake, take the time to listen to people. if you haven't been there, you don't have any idea really of what that's like. At least that's what I see, because I don't fully understand it. But I think my approach would be to sit down and say, let's talk. Let's don't run away from it. Let's don't try to pretend it doesn't exist, because it does exist. It's a major part of our lives, turning point in our lives in many respects. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I think it's important to have compassion for people, to try to understand how they feel, as opposed to, projecting how you feel about everything in the world and giving your opinion. Listen to them. They have a lot to say, and they have a tough road in most cases, I guess. And it breaks my heart when I hear of another Vietnam veteran or anybody taking their own life. My father took his own life. He was a Marine, made the landing on Iwo Jima, came home, and alcoholism affected his life from that point on, and he eventually took his life. So when I hear about somebody taking their own life, that really touches me, and it breaks my heart, because there's got to be something we can do. We're not out of answers, I don't think, and I know I'm being very naive in how I'm addressing this, but you talk about the camaraderie we had amongst each other. One of the things that I think unknowingly the people that handled us when we came home, there was not much happiness in Vietnam, the Vietnam era at home. When we came home, we were treated like heroes, and we weren't heroes. We just got caught and went through a bad time, but heroes we didn't consider ourselves as being. But when we were in prison, when you're the guy next door to you in that blocked off cell, when he was out getting the living daylights kicked out of him, the minute he got back in, we would make sure the guards were gone, and we'd start tapping on the wall. Say, hold on. And I refer to it as we were holding hands through a wall. And it was important that we did that, because you got to have something positive, and you're probably laying in there hurting all over from the beatings and bloody, and somebody taps through the wall and said, hang on, it'll be better tomorrow, and we're with you, and God bless you. Our tradition, I think I'm maybe one of the worst, but all my friends, when I tap to them, or when I send emails and stuff, I always end it, GBU, God bless you. But when we came home, a sad story, one of our brightest young people, didn't have a lot of military experience, just brilliant, had clung to, he'd just been married when he got shot down. He shot down very early. He only flew a handful of missions, backseater in an F-4. And he came home, and everything had changed. Everything he had clung to was upside down. And came home, and all the euphoria, we scattered all of the United States. We were going hither and yon, and nobody thought to make a roster with our phone numbers on it. How you get in touch with Orson, or how do I get in touch with Wes? And we couldn't tap through the wall. We couldn't hold hands and get out of it. And this young man became essentially alone. He wasn't, but mentally he was alone, dealing with this extraordinary disappointment. And he took his own life. And I still say to this day, had the people who handled us coming home, had they thought of it, had we thought of it for that matter, and he had called any one of us and talked, he probably never would have done that. And I think it's just important. You got to have compassion, and it's got to be the sincerest of compassion. I really do care about you. You're my friend. Even if I don't know you, you're my friend, because you've been through something like I have. And I think that's an essential ingredient. And I think having that kind of compassion has to be from the most senior to the lowest of ranks. There's no difference. We're all the same. We all need that kind of reinforcement. So I try to approach those young Marines or military people that were in a room having this kind of problem by just telling them how I feel a little bit and listening to how they feel, and how do we get out of this? work our way out, because many have done remarkable things. There's some of the Vietnam veterans are a remarkable group of people, as you, I'm sure, know statistically. We are, you know, I think I read something recently that said something over 90% of Vietnam veterans, when asked of their participation in that horrible, horrible, tragic mistake, would they do it again? And they say, yeah. And that's because of the camaraderie. Nobody can understand that camaraderie. I defy anybody, as well-intentioned or as smart as they might be, you cannot understand that. And we see it all the time. I see guys in especially the military, I go over and speak to them anyway. Airports say thank you, but if I see Vietnam veterans, I always go and say, where were you? And just strike up a conversation with them, because we're part of a very special group of people. We gave, as some said, all gave some and some gave all, and that's really true.
Okay, Patrick, we need to make a mic adjustment.
Okay.
He brushed his chest and now it's scraping.
Did I disconnect myself?
No, you're not disconnected. The microphone.
I'll try to avoid doing that.
And I hear clothing scraping.
Yes. Carrie, what are you saying to me?
Are the little mics too close together?
Yeah, I was hearing a little bit of clothing. It's not terrible, but
You can pull that up if you want. There's lots of room down here.
Flip this around.
Just put one on one side and one on the other.
Yeah, we don't mind seeing
it's a
that.
nice butt shot, Patrick.
Thank you, sir.
The girls will be impressed. Okay. Nice butt shot.
Well, my Georgia daughter-in-law says that she doesn't want her kids to use the word butt. She's from Georgia. That's not a good word there, right?
Well,
We use it everywhere. No, we use it, but in the South,
In the
Bills,
South,
how's
it's
that?
really
How does that look?
that's a common expression.
is it?
Well,
Okay,
she may be a family that went to Georgia
It's more
Tech, and
visible now than-
we used to play a coach named Wally Butts, and nobody liked him.
Can you just move your arms a little bit? Let's just see if I hear the sound. No, it's good now.
Okay,
Do we
good.
clap or no?
No, we're still rolling. Okay. We're good. Thank you, sir.
So it's fair to say, I think is what I'm hearing, is that you're still tapping through the wall today.
Oh yeah, never stop. I think it's a product of age. As you get older, you realize you can't do all the things you used to do, and there are other ways to compensate for that. And the way I've compensated for it, but it's not so much trying to compensate. I just have an enormous affection for my friends. I like to stay in touch with them. I'm one of these guys that if there are three of us together, we're going to meet somewhere and have lunch, you know, or drink a beer or whatever. And I enjoy staying in touch with everybody. And I have a regular group of people that we're conversing all the time on news of the day and politics. And, you know, we love to share technical stuff that, you know, there are all sorts of newspapers, military, and it tells us all about the new airplanes. And we're just sharing stuff all the time. I'm probably a nuisance to most of them, but I enjoy hearing from them. And when I've got time and I'm traveling, if I'm nearby, I'm going to go see as many as I can. Or if I go to D.C., we have so many friends there that we just say, okay, we're going to meet over at Nam Viet Restaurant. That's a restaurant where we have our Tet dinners. And I said, you know, same deal. We're all going to pay our share, and I'll be there if you care to show up, please do. And we'll have, you know, 10, 20 people show up, and we just have the best time talking and probably telling the same stories over again. But it's really important. I'm convinced that in the long haul of a journey through life, the most important things you'll ever deal with are not physical objects or trips or anything. It's the people and the memories you share with those people. Really important.
You have spoken a number of times about the importance of humor, and you told an anecdotal story of the first time you met John McCain.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tie those two things together as an example of the power of humor, and then tell that story?
Well, one of the first rules is if a new guy said, you know, keep your sense of humor. This is going to be a long haul. You know, if you can't, I mean, it was so insane what we went through. And as I said, many just said, just kill me. I don't want any more of this. And we found that humor, people with sense of humor always seem to get through if they're serious. I mean, you can have the blooming idiot walking around laughing at everything. I shouldn't say things like that, but having a sense of humor is a tremendous asset. Finding something funny in a otherwise black circumstance, and the story about John, they took about 25 or 30 of us out to a remote camp. This is in 71 or 70, I think it was, 71, and early 71. And we named the place Skid Row because it looked like a dirty place. And they had us out there, and they told us, Colonel Bud Day, now Brigadier General posthumously, one of my dearest friends, Bud Day, he was in charge of us, and they told us, just don't make any trouble and we'll leave you alone. So we were talking among each other, and we get to this place, and there are these 18 stalls with cells, and we have a barred door, and we're identifying, okay, who's in the first room, and we call that room 1, and we count it off. Coley Haynes, I'm in room 6, Orson Swindle, I'm in 7. Gets on down here to McCain, and he was I'd never met him before. I tapped through the wall a couple of times to him, and he's about down around room 13 or so, and he said, "Hey, Ors," he said, "I really admire you. You're a Marine. I always wanted to be a Marine when I was in the Naval Academy." And I said, "Well, John, why didn't you become a Marine?" He said, "Well, they wouldn't let me." I said, "What do you mean? You're Naval Academy. Surely they would let a Naval Academy guy go in the Marine Corps." He said, "No." I said, "Well, what was the problem?" They said I wasn't qualified, that my parents were married, and therefore I couldn't be a Marine. And that's the first thing I heard from him. And John had a great sense of humor. He was I would describe him almost as being a prankster. And we saw a bit of that in his later life as a public official. But every one of us, almost without exception, had a sense of humor. Sometimes it was a morbid sense of humor. We had, you got to have a sense of humor to deal with this. I think I told you one story about one guy who was senior to me. I was a captain in the Marine Corps, and he's a lieutenant commander, and he's a Naval Academy graduate, and he's smart, and he's a great guy. Had a great laugh, but he whined all the time. And I told him one time, I said, "You are senior to me, and I know when we get out, because of what I'm about to say, you're going to court-martial me." I said, "But that's okay. If you don't stop this whining, I'm going to kick your ass." And he just laughed. Wonderful guy, but everybody had a sense of humor. It was displayed in so many different ways.
You were changed in so many ways by your experience in Vietnam, but if you could, sir, when you look back about it, the young man you were who was shot down, the mature man you are today, what was the most significant change that happened for you, or the most significant impact that experience?
Well, I think it's several things. Number one, you start being more serious about life. All of a sudden, being a fighter pilot, you're invincible, and nobody will shoot you down. All of a sudden, you just got your butt shot down, and you're sitting in a very tough situation. And you start thinking about, what have I done with my life? Did I live it to the fullest? Did I do the right things? And we all went through phases of saying, "Oh, I didn't do that very well, and I feel embarrassed about that or ashamed of that." And it's a natural process. We can talk about it later, but the feeling of guilt. But you mature immensely in this situation. You don't have any choice. You better get mature very quickly and accept what's happening. Quit feeling sorry for yourself, and realize that it's not all over. You're going to accomplish what you set out to do to the best of your ability, and so you get far more serious about things. I think you come to realize that faith is a pretty important ingredient. That's not to say that every person we had in prison had a deep abiding faith. Some claim to be atheists. I'm not sure I can imagine how one does not have faith, or one could be an atheist in that circumstance, because it just doesn't seem to fit. But vast majority of us, I would say, had some real serious thoughts about what faith meant to us. That doesn't mean we were evangelical and going overboard on anything. It just meant with me, it's an inner thing. It's a deep sense of dependence upon a higher being, asking for assistance more than anything else. Praying for other people, and I pray silently, and I pray for other people all the time, and I basically just, my primary request of a higher being was, please help me endure what I must endure to come out of this with honor. That's all. I didn't ask for a magic balloon to come down and pluck me out. I said, just help me get through this and uphold the responsibilities I have. And boy, when you've been beaten down to the point where you feel bad about yourself, you failed everybody. You failed your family. You failed your schoolmates. You failed the Marine Corps. You failed everybody. You're convinced you're the worst person in the world, and you got to get away from that real quickly, because that's not going to get you through. But more mature certainly is a greater part of it. I think mentioning John McCain, one of John's occasionally mentioned traits, when asked what did it do to him, he said, it helped me realize that I'd fallen in love with my country for the first time. And here he is. We'd been 4 years at the Naval Academy, 5 years out flying. That's a heck of a statement to say, a guy who's on a path to stay in the Navy and be a professional and go as far as he said, I came to love my country. And I think a lot of us, in fact, it's not that we didn't really love our country, it's just we never thought about it. But we think about it now. I gave you, I told you a story about the lady out in Washington that didn't want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I just told a friend of mine, I said, you know what the flag means to me? I said, tell her, but I'm not going to tell her. But lo and behold, did she tell her? She had it all printed up, and it was a full-page ad in the paper. And it was just me talking about what it all means to me today. And I couldn't have done that prior to that experience, I don't think. I was a pretty serious guy, and I really was. I've studied history. I read all the time. I'm reading 2 books about the history of settling the West out here, and so I had an affection for the country, but I don't think it's not as intense as it is now. I think that most of us reacted that way.
When we were talking with Ed Alvarez, he brought up a word, and he talked about it. I would like to ask you about it. It's a word that civilians don't often associate with the military. They don't think in those terms, but when you come to know any military man, you actually come to a true military man. You come to feel this word is really important, and that is love.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to me about love in your experience? Because I think you've grown in your understanding of that.
Well, as I said, it goes back to this day. I still stay in touch with guys. I was about to say kids, we're no longer kids. Stay in touch with guys that I grew up with. We were this tall, growing up, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. We were a little town, and so we knew everybody, and everybody knew us. And that's a part of this necessity on my part of staying in touch. It's out of this bond, this love of them as a person. And I think the word Philadelphia is brotherly love. The Latin, or I guess it's Latin, and I can't remember how you pronounce it, so I'm not going to dwell into that, delve into that. But it's this sense of love for your fellow man. And when you're in hard times, that really gets magnified. Know that he's going through what you just went through, and you pray for him, and you hope him, you encourage him in whatever way you can, tapping through walls or screaming over a doorway or something like that. Hang in there, so and so. We're all here. Hang in there, and it's a powerful affection. And when you see us at reunions, that we hug each other unabashedly, you know, we really are fond of each other and we respect it. It's an affection that is driven by love. It's driven by respect. We just simply respect these people because they have been through worse than I have. You know, I never met many that I didn't think had a hell of a lot harder time than I did. And just enormous respect. When you hear, I didn't meet Robinson Reisner, General Reisner, until the last few days, I think, we were in prison. And I'm not even sure then if I actually met him. It may have been shortly after we got home. When I was first, and I knew about him, he was a great hero in Korea and just a remarkable man, remarkable leader, squadron leader of an F-105 outfit that just went into the jaws of hell and got chewed up. And they tortured him unmercifully. And on one of the propaganda tapes, he says who he is. And I knew that's Colonel Reisner. And I could hardly hear his voice. They had bludgeoned him so badly. And I was solo, and I was just gotten there, and I'm listening to this stuff. And I actually wept for him because he had been through incredible pain. And here's this proud, incredibly talented leader, and they have just driven him to his knees to where he would make this tape. And I developed an incredible love and respect for him right there. Never met him. When I meet him, he was, of course, much healthier, but still a marvelous, marvelous man. When he died, well, before he died, he became a good friend of Ross Perot's when we came on. He's from Oklahoma, was living in Texas. And Ross told me, he asked Robbie one time, how did it feel being released after he was there 7.5 years? You know, brutality galore. The senior officers just got hammered. And Robbie said, you know, Ross, I felt like I was 9 feet tall. I was so happy. And Ross, had, unbeknownst to anybody, had a bronze sculpture of Robbie Reisner that was exactly 9 feet tall, made. And it's a replica of it is at the Air Force Academy down the road. And Ross also had one made for Bud Day, my dear friend Bud Day. And it just says reams about this affection and respect. You know, it's when we talk about these guys, I can't help but get choked up. But when you talk about Jim Stockdale and Jerry Denton and Robbie Reisner and Bud Day, and the list goes on, you couldn't have handpicked a better group of leaders to put in that environment. And we all got there by pure circumstance. You know, it happened. And they were there to show us the way. And you love those people, big time. They helped you get through.
And I'm trying to be conscious of our time. Kerry, what time is it? Can I have?
I'm probably talking too long.
No, sir, not at all. Okay, and what did we promise that we would carry?
12:30.
Okay.
So you got, I'll get plenty of time.
Okay, I want to be conscious of
I can stay in after school. If we have to.
There were 3 words at some point along the way, and I think perhaps Stockdale was the architect of it.
Return with honor.
Talk to me about return with honor.
That was everything. Everything we did as individuals, when we were taking an interrogation, you know, we described it as being in combat. We were fighting a war behind the lines, and I say that because, you know, I went out on over 200 missions, and I didn't anticipate having any pain on those 200 missions. I was going to fly and I'd get shot down and come home. When you went out to interrogation, no matter what the times were, there was a bit of nervousness about it, because the minute you said no, and you were going to say no, here comes the hammers, you know, and the ropes. I shouldn't use the word hammer because I don't recall anybody being in it, but just the force that's going to force you to buckle under and do what you don't want to do, because that was their plan. They wanted to humiliate you and have you start feeling badly about yourself and what you had done. And that gets to the heart of return with honor. We lived in almost a kind of fear that we might let our country down. We were hell-bent and determined when we came home, the country, well, however the war ended, they were going to be proud of us because we were not going to buckle under without a fight. And we knew that the odds were against us, that every time the fight started, we figured we were probably going to lose. But, you know, something I coined just among my friends, I said, you know, after all this time, I said, the mark of real men is not that you cannot be broken, that they won't really hammer you down and make you do things you know you shouldn't do. But that's reality. They can do that. The mark of real men is once you're hammered down, you get up off the floor and get back in the ring. And that's sort of what Teddy Roosevelt said, talking about the man in the arena. And Jim Stockdale, God bless Admiral Stockdale, if I had to pick one single person and how he conducted himself that saved most of us, if not all of us, it would be him. He set a tone because of his strong, enormously strong convictions and intellect. And he said, we have got to be a community, if that's the right word, within ourselves, because there's nobody that can help us. Only thing we got going for us is what we brought in here. And they took all the physical things away from us. It's what's inside of our minds and our heart. And he said, we're going to resist, and here's how we're going to do it. And he laid out guidelines. And I think in our conversations, we talked about how there is a lingering sense of guilt on the part of probably 90% or more of us who is broken, and you feel like you let somebody down. He said that, and Jim, I remember saying to us, he said, that's a natural feeling. He said, but forget about it. You do the best you can. That's all you can do. And for one person, it may be taking the ropes for 3 days, and another one, it might be 2 hours. Whatever it is, whatever you're capable of doing, do it. Just don't get yourself over the edge to where you can't recover. Don't lose your mental faculties. Don't get yourself in such a bind that you're just puttying their hands through the threat of torture. His guidance, his maturity, his wisdom. I mean, the man's. If I've ever served with an intellectual, Jim Stockdale was the intellectual. But he and Robbie Reisner and Larry Garino and Bud Day and Jerry Denton and all these incredible people, all of whom are gone now, took an unbelievable punishment. But that return with honor just echoed over and over and over, silently echoed, verbally spoken. But we reminded ourselves all the time, that's what we want to do. We're going to return with honor. And that entailed a whole lot of stuff, as you can imagine. It was going to be rough going, but that's the only way we get out of here with our dignity and our integrity and our pride. And we did. Jim Stockdale accomplished everything he wanted to accomplish, I think. We lost some good men along the way, but we did it.
Young people today, hearing of your experience and your story, they can look up to you and they can hear the words return with honor in a lofty way. But whether or not they understand the importance of that in their own lives, because they might say, well, yeah, but I'm not in a prison camp, or
But
what is the importance of it?
It's applicable in life, for God's sake. You know, you want to be trusted. You want to be known for a person who will keep his word. You want to be known for somebody. You want to be known as somebody who is willing to stand up for something. That's so important. I think most young people today, I hate to say it, I guess I'm too pessimistic, but I don't think they have a clue. I really don't. I mean, you know, when I think of what our young people who are in the military go through, the hard training, the deprivation, the risks, the danger, And we got kids in college that need a safe space so that they will feel secure. You know, so something's really wrong here. I mean, what have we done to our country? What have we done in our education system? But it's hard for a person who has not experienced what we went through. An older generation understands better than the younger generation because they've seen that before. If you're old enough, you saw those brave young people in World War II come home after literally years away, most of the time in some kind of active engagement to supporting the war or fighting it. And as you get to the younger generations today, I don't think they understand just how much sacrifice is required to keep giving them the things that they now have become accustomed to and they want to be given to them. And it's tough, but you know, if a young person will give me 15 minutes, I'll tell them about return with honor.
Well, let's follow just a little bit of a thought here. A lot of these young kids might say to themselves, yeah, but I'm never going to get captured. And I mean, at the likelihood I'll get captured. So, but, you know, as we found out, honor is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it the day you need it.
Well, that's why I say it's in your everyday life. You got to live that way. It's a creed to live by. You know, we have history has replete with examples of people who endeavored to pursue a dream or a big cause. I'm reading David Limbaugh's book. It's called He is Risen, and it's about the disciples after Christ died. And it's about, they knew what was coming. It was going to be tough because they were taking a different stand, and they did it because they believed in something. You go out in the professional life today, it's going to be competitive, but because it's competitive, it doesn't mean you drop your standards or you don't adhere to a high level of integrity. You live return with honor every darn day of your life, one way or another. It may not appear to be, but you're loyal to your family, you're loyal to your school or things that are important to you, and you try to make the country, and the country is always there. I'm not sure that may be the missing ingredient today. We're so diverse in our desires today that maybe nobody thinks much about the country that makes it possible to be diverse and all over the map about what you think about. And I think we need to do a better job of teaching young people that. Our kids, our grandkids are in, it's a charter school based on the Hillsdale model of classic liberal education, which is what I got, what you got when we grew up. We were taught that way. And when they went to kindergarten here, you know, they're in their third grade, and they went to the first kindergarten class. If they stick with it, which we fully intend for them to do, they will be the first graduates that made it from kindergarten to graduation, and they're good students. But they went to kindergarten, and they came home, I think it was the second day, and we were with them, and they said, "Papa, you know what we learned today?" And I said, "What?" "We learned the Pledge of Allegiance." And all three of them recited it. And they don't do that in public schools anymore. I grew up that way. You know, the things that I believe in are so entrenched in my being because of how I was raised to love my country. I was old enough during World War II. We, Camilla, Georgia, we had air raids. I don't think the Germans or the Japanese could find Camilla, Georgia, much less come and bomb it. But we had the National Guard, and the National Guard that was left, well, all the old guys who were too old to go to the war, but they were out there drilling in the doughboy hats from World War I and the Springfield rifles. And we as kids, we went around, looked at every junkyard we could find for any metal that we could find. We collected metal, scrap metal, for the war cause. We grew victory gardens so we could produce the food we needed so the food that was produced elsewhere could be sent over for the war cause. We did all those things. We were involved, And I think we've gotten, with the assistance of technology, we've all separated our own little spheres out here, and I think we all have a sphere of influence, but I swear to God, I think some of these kids have a sphere of influence of one. And you've got to build that into who you are. And I was blessed. I was raised by my grandmother and great aunt. My mother and father divorced, and both alcoholics. And I said, I'm staying right here with my grandmother. And the TOLs, as we call them, the two old ladies, they didn't know beans about football. They'd go to football games because I was playing, and the only thing they knew to ask after each play is number 42's uniform still clean. But, they instill in me just rock solid concepts and beliefs and a sense of responsibility. I had things that I had to do because it's my obligation to do them. So I don't know. I think we got a real problem looking at the future, and that's not to say we don't have some brilliant kids. We got two that live right across the street over here, just almost perfect. They're just wonderful kids. They're good students. They're civic minded. They do everything. But we got a problem.
Maybe a young person today could say to you, why do I need honor? I mean, I look around the world and there's successful CEOs, there's successful politicians, there's successful guys in Silicon Valley and everything else, and they don't have honor. I don't see honor. I mean, why do I need it? What would you say to them?
Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. That's the simplest way I know how to say it. If you know what we're talking about, and you're not driven to be an honorable person, you are worthless, in my mind. You don't contribute anything. You're a taker. Ever read Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand? She describes takers and makers or producers, I think is the word she used. And I agree, the youngsters, I agree with them in one sense. They've got some terrible examples being set for them. I mean, when you mentioned politics, we need to lock virtually every single one of those guys in Congress up and put them away somewhere. But there are all sorts of bad things. But that's been the case forever. For God's sake, man is not perfect, and we've all had to contend with that in one way or another. But with good teachers, understanding what this country is all about, where it came from, how we got here. And for God's sake, I wish we make a point today in our education. I don't even think we teach our history much anymore. At least I have the impression we don't. But I would insist if we're going to teach history, and we have to teach history, otherwise we're nobody, we need to tell all these youngsters who seem so disillusioned when they find out that this country is not perfect. We have made terrible mistakes in this evolution. I come from the South. Just the mention of slavery is the most repugnant thing in the world to me. But that was a part of our history. And now we're tearing down all the statues that were within 10 or 15 years of that period of time. And that's a lack of education when people can't understand history, that is part of history. We can't erase that. But what happened afterwards, we changed things. The society evolved. We got rid of a lot of distasteful things, horrible things. And that's the whole path of humankind. If you go back as far back as we can go in recorded history, and you read about that evolution. So for young people to say, well, I'm not going to church because they're bad popes or bad priests or bad preachers, that's stupid. That's naivete at its worst. And I don't care how young you are, you shouldn't be that damn naive, So we got to understand we're human beings, and if you don't understand who you are, where you come from, how we got to this place, I don't know how you understand any of this stuff. But I was taught very young that I came from a great country, not good country, great country. But we made some horrible mistakes along the way. And being from the South, I heard racial slurs all my young life. It was repugnant to me, and thank God, I don't know where that came from. I knew that was wrong. And I had relatives. Some said, it's horrible. Some would say, echo the remarks because that's the era that was in. Were they bad people? No, they were not. They were wonderful people. And part of my strength comes from them. But they were of a time that's where we were, and we were working our way out of that. And that's a part of maturity to understand these things. And if you're so immature and so ill-informed, if you have no sense of history, and I mean history from everywhere, not just here, just understand what mankind has gone through to get to where we are today. I don't know how you make it. I really don't. But we do have dishonorable, for lack of a better word, in business, disgusting conduct by some leaders. We have a whole industry, the movie industry ought to all be locked up. But we have it in sports. These guys are making so much money, they act like children. They have no sense of integrity. They just give me more money. We see it in every walk of life, even in the churches that I mentioned. We see people who do bad things, but that's what man does. Man's been doing bad things for a long time, but man has made progress beyond belief. And we in this country, my God, no country in history has ever sacrificed so much for people other than its own than this country here. We ought to just be saying, hallelujah, let's keep doing it. But what do? We find something we did wrong, and now we focus in on that and to blow everything up. That's not too smart.
Outside your door hangs the American flag, and you tell a story of waiting for that transport plane. And can you tell me that story and tell me about the importance of that flag out there for you?
Well, I have a friend that I had met. I went out and did a speech and met this delightful lady. Her first name is Dixie. And she had been she still is working with the Red Cross all these years after Vietnam, but she was one of the Red Cross gals that was over there right next to the combat zones taking care of wounded GIs, and just a beautiful human being. And in her community, they had a newly elected member of the city council who was Mexican American, if I remember correctly, it's Hispanic American, and she'd born in the United States. Family came from another country, and she was a very liberal, if I may use that term, person. And she said in a first public meeting that she didn't stand for the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, which most government agencies start their meetings off with that. And when asked why, she said, well, it doesn't represent me. And here she is, first generation American, just got elected to the city council of a nice town, and that doesn't represent her. And my friend told me this. She said, what should we do? And we talked about things they might do. And I told them to make her famous. But anyway, she said, my friend asked me, he said, what do you think about when you think of the flag? And I said, well, I've known about it all my life. I was taught early, and I understand it, and I know the sacrifices. I said, but I want to just describe a scene for you to show you my emotions about our flag. I said, I had been a prisoner of war for 2,305 days, and they finally came around and took me and others that were shot down at the same time out to Geelong, I think it was Geelong Airport in Hanoi, to depart. We had been repatriated. We were free. And we had been, treated rather roughly for a long period of time, and we honestly weren't sure this was the truth. We had not seen vivid evidence that we were actually going to be leaving that day. But anyway, they loaded us on a bus, and first good sign, we didn't have a blindfold on. So we rode through Hanoi, and we saw the bomb destruction from the B-52s. And we get out to the airport, and this bus, I think there were about 20 on this bus, it pulls over behind a hangar, an old rusty hangar. I guess the French maybe built it years before. And we're sitting there, and the Vietnamese are being very nice to us. They bring us tea and a little cookie.
We're sitting there saying, give me a break. You know, this is just nuts. Let's get on whatever we're doing here. So we're sitting there, and we're starting to believe that maybe something's going on because we hear a large crowd over here in another area around the corner of this building. And we're sitting there contemplating what's maybe about to happen and trying to get that in perspective, and we're chatting with each other. And up out of the corner of my eye, I see the smoke trail from a big airplane, a C-141, which I was familiar with. And it starts approaching. I say, guys, this is real. I think maybe we are going to go home. And we watch that airplane, and it comes in from maybe a couple of miles out, and finally it disappears the horizon and the buildings. It disappears behind them, and it lands. And now it's taxiing down the runway and coming over to where we were going to be released. We didn't know that for sure. But anyway, it taxied up close enough for us to see that we could see the tail of the aircraft moving along above those buildings. And there was a big American flag on it. And when we saw that, I don't think there was a dry eye on that bus. It was the most emotional thing I think I've seen in a long time. And there was a lot of emotional things about to occur with us, as you can imagine. But that one thing, as I told my friend, that's how I feel about the flag. I had done my best to not dishonor it. All my friends had done the same thing. We had suffered mightily. We had lost some friends. And we'd been there a long time. And our feelings for that flag had not changed. And it was an inner feeling in most cases, because most of us, as boisterous as we are, we don't go around. I don't wear my patriotism on my sleeve or my religion or faith on my sleeve, but it's deep within me. And I said, that's what the flag means to me. That's my flag. That's what I serve with honor about. That was our motto, return with honor. And I sent it to my friend, and I said, maybe this will give you some ideas. The next thing I know, she's sending me a copy of a full-page ad that she and some of the veterans that she worked with to honor veterans throughout the year, they all pitched in and bought a full-page ad in the newspaper and published that thing. So I think they got the point across to the lady. Whether she ever stood again, I don't know. Maybe they'll defeat her in an election this year or something. But anyway, we have our own little ways of working and fighting and making them famous.
Beautiful, sir. Beautiful. Carrie?
12:30.
Yeah, it's 12:30?
Yeah.
Wow.
And don't
Okay.
forget, no, excuse me.
Wait a minute, it's 11:30.
11:30, I was gonna say. Okay,
We have all the, looking and pointing at
yes,
pictures. when you-
yeah, I'm gonna, just, Carrie, I just wanna check with you in terms of the notes you took. I just,
Living in this country, the mountains, freedom,
Bill, you got the pictures you wanted, right?
children,
Yes, sir.
vulnerability of POWs past, and his father and his vision.
yeah, I think we should do his father's, you wanna cut for a second? And then
We could.
we'll start a new, I think we'll bring your father's,